Absolute value. So this comes into play because sometimes when we're solving problems mathematically we can get a negative as a solution, but in reality if you're talking about something like the distance, negatives don't apply. We can't have a negative distance, and so absolute values are used a lot in that sort of stuff. So the definition for absolute value is this thing here. The absolute value of x is equal to x if x is greater than or equal to 0, so positive or 0, and negative x when x is less than 0. Now that all sounds really confusing. What it really means is how far away from 0 is it? Remembering negative numbers have size, magnitude, but also direction, and absolute value isn't considering the direction. We just want to know how far away it is, not in which direction it travelled. So the absolute value of 4, well, how far away from 0 is 4? It's 4. So what's the absolute value of negative 2? Well, think about your number line. How far away from 0 is negative 2? The absolute value of negative 2 is equal to 2. So some of the properties of absolute values are absolute value of AB is equal to the absolute value of A times the absolute value of B. So the absolute value of 3 times negative 4 is the same thing as working out the absolute value of 3 times the absolute value of negative 4. You get an answer of 12. Now the absolute value of A all squared is the same thing as A squared, because when you square a negative you still end up with a positive. The square root of A squared is equal to the absolute value of A, so even if A was negative, you're still going to end up with a positive in this case. The absolute value of negative A is equal to the absolute value of A. That makes perfect sense. Minus 3 is just as far away from 0 as 3. Now the absolute value of A minus B is equal to the absolute value of B minus A. Think about that for just a minute. What is the absolute value of 3 minus 5? What's the absolute value of negative 2? Which equals 2. The absolute value of 5 minus 3 is obviously the absolute value of 2, which is 2. Make sense? But this is the one you really need to think about. The absolute value of A plus B is less than or equal to the absolute value of A plus the absolute value of B. Now I want to discuss this as a class next lesson. I'm not going to go through a big lecture here where you're just listening to me. So I want you guys to play with that. Pick some numbers, big ones, small ones, positives, negatives, sub them in, figure out what's going on, and we'll talk about it during the lesson. So we'll look at an example. The absolute value of 5 minus the absolute value of negative 6 plus the absolute value of negative 2 all squared. So step by step. Absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of negative 6 is 6. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2, which when we square it we get 4. Hopefully you all end up with an answer of 3. But what happens if we introduce algebra? Look at the example, the absolute value of 2x plus 10. There's 2 to consider. When 2x plus 10 is positive or greater than or equal to 0, we have an equation to solve. It's pretty simple. 2x has to be greater than or equal to negative 10, so x is greater than or equal to negative 5. But there's another option. 2x plus 10 could be less than 0. So when that's negative, it's another inequation. 2x plus 10 less than 0, so 2x is less than negative 10, so x is less than negative 5. 2 options when there's algebra involved. That's what you need to do exercise 1.9.